Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving into a massive clash of global strategies. You've got the super fast, high pressure moves of the Trump administration on one side, and on the other, the incredibly patient, multi-generational playbook of China. It's kind of like watching a sprinter try to outrun a marathon runner on the world's biggest stage. So you gotta ask yourself, was the whole trade war thing just a temporary storm? A bunch of back and forth arguments? Or did it accidentally pull back the curtain on something way bigger? A really deep difference in how two global superpowers see the entire world and their own place in it. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First up, we'll look at the core difference in their thinking, that whole sprint versus marathon idea. Then we'll get into the disruption caused by the Trump administration. After that, we'll dive deep into China's super patient playbook, see how they actually responded, and finally, look at what all this means for the future. Okay, let's start with the most basic difference between these two. And believe it or not, it's not about money or military might. It's about time. This is really a clash of strategic timelines. In this slide, this really gets to the heart of the mismatch. Think about it. The US system is pretty much built for speed. It runs on 4-year election cycles and quarterly earnings reports. You need quick, flashy wins that you can show off. But China? It's operating on a totally different clock. Its centralized system is built for planning that spans decades, prioritizing long-term stability over any short-term gain. It's the ultimate sprinter against the ultimate marathon runner. So what happens when that sprinter suddenly decides to just change the rules of the race halfway through? Well, that brings us to the Trump disruption, which was all about shaking up the status quo. The whole strategy was built on one word: disruption. The idea was to bypass all that slow, traditional diplomacy and instead hit the system with rapid, decisive shocks, mostly through tariffs. The goal was to force an immediate reaction and totally rewrite the economic relationship between the US and China. And man, this timeline just shows how fast it all happened. Things kick off with an investigation in 2017, and boom, by 2018, we've got major tariffs. It keeps escalating through 2019, and then we get the Phase 1 deal. In the world of global politics, this was all happening at absolute lightning speed. And the scale of this thing was just massive. We're talking about tariffs on over $350 billion worth of goods. This wasn't some subtle negotiation tactic. It was a huge economic lever being pulled to create immediate pain and force a change. Okay, so how does the marathon runner react when the sprinter suddenly takes off in a burst of speed? Well, they don't panic, they just stick to their race plan. And that brings us to China's long game. I think this quote just captures their entire philosophy perfectly. All the tariffs and the political pressure, from their perspective, that was just temporary weather. The focus wasn't on some panicked reaction, but on getting ready for a long-term shift in the global climate. And the core idea behind all of this is something called strategic patience. What is that? Well, it's the discipline to absorb a short-term hit, to basically take a punch, without getting dragged into a messy brawl that distracts you from what you really want to achieve in the long run. So how does that actually work in practice? Well, it kind of boils down to 3 key steps. First, you just absorb the pressure. Don't freak out. Second, you use this whole disruption as a reason to go out and make new friends, to cultivate new partners, so you're not so reliant on any one country. And third, and this might be the most important one, you accelerate your push to become self-reliant, especially in really critical areas like technology. All right, so that's the playbook on paper. Now, let's take a look at how China actually put this strategy to work in the real world. And right here, you can see the strategy in motion. It's fascinating. The US slaps on steel tariffs. China doesn't just do the same thing back. No, they counter with tariffs on American agriculture, hitting a politically sensitive spot. The US sanctions a tech giant like Huawei. China's response isn't just a sternly worded letter, it's a massive national push for their own domestic tech. See? Every single move is a calculated countermove, always played with the long game in mind. So what was the actual result of this super patient strategy? Well, it wasn't just about weathering the storm. China actually used all that pressure as a catalyst, as fuel. They deepened trade ties all across Asia, they launched a massive new trade pact, and they poured a ton of money into becoming a technological powerhouse in AI and 5G. They basically used the disruption to speed up their own long-term plan to move away from depending on anyone else. So all this brings us to the end game. After all these moves and countermoves, what was the final result? why does this whole clash of timelines even matter for the rest of us? And the data tells a really clear story here. While trade with the US definitely took a hit, you can see how trade with regions like Southeast Asia just surged. This wasn't some abstract idea. Their diversification strategy had a real measurable impact. The result? A China that's way less economically dependent on any single country.
So here's the bottom line, the really crucial point. This isn't just a history lesson. This clash of strategic thinking, of different timelines, is a fundamental dynamic that is absolutely going to keep shaping global trade, tech development, and international relations for years and years to come.
So what are the big things to take away from all this? Well, first, your sense of time basically determines your entire strategy. Second, China's playbook is all about using short-term pain to build long-term strength. And finally, remember that this dynamic is far from over. It's really a key to understanding where the global economy is headed next. Which leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. A sprinter and a marathon runner might be on the same track, but they are absolutely not running the same race. So, in a global contest between speed and patience, who actually gets to decide where the finish line is?